Let us begin with the greatest illusion of this historical hierarchy: the operations department versus the internal security startup. Or, as history knows them, the Wehrmacht and the SS. Internet tier lists love to automatically place the SS at a higher level than the regular army. This is fundamentally incorrect. In this totalitarian corporation, these were two completely separate, rival departments that absolutely despised each other. They did not function in harmony. They functioned in a state of constant, aggressive bureaucratic friction. First, we look at the operations department, the Wehrmacht. These were the established professionals. The traditional military engineers, tacticians, and strategists like Erich von Manstein, or the logistics elites like Wilhelm Keitel and Alfred Jodl. They managed the astronomical national budgets. They commanded the millions of conscripts, the panzer divisions, and the heavy artillery networks. From a corporate perspective, they were the ones doing the actual heavy lifting on the operational front. They possessed generations of Prussian military pedigree, trained in elite academies long before the ruling party ever existed. Because of this deep-rooted professionalism, the army generals looked down upon the SS as a group of amateur, uneducated street opportunists playing dressed-up politics. On the battlefield, the true kinetic power and strategic operational control belonged entirely to the Wehrmacht. Then, we have the internal security startup, the SS. Managed by Heinrich Himmler and his chief financial officer Oswald Pohl, the SS was essentially a parasitic subsidiary, a heavily armed state within a state. In the early years of the conflict, they completely lacked the tactical skills, the heavy logistics, and the rigorous military discipline of the regular army. But what they lacked in military science, they made up for in sheer ideological fanaticism and a direct, unshakable line of protection from the CEO. People assume the SS commanded the army. That is a complete historical myth. A low-level SS officer had absolutely no authority to walk into a command tent and give orders to a Wehrmacht general. Their ranks were parallel, not vertical. However, because the dictator favored absolute ideological compliance over practical military logic, he allowed the SS to build its own private, heavily funded army, the Waffen-SS. This parallel existence created a logistical paradox and an absolute nightmare for supply chains. While the regular Wehrmacht was freezing and experiencing severe supply shortages on the Eastern Front, the SS was hoarding its own separate manufacturing contracts, custom uniforms, and premium supply lines, actively siphoning vital resources away from the primary operational effort. It was the ultimate form of internal corporate sabotage. So, in an aggressively toxic corporation, who holds the true power? The seasoned professionals breaking their backs to carry out the monumental physical operations? Or the fanatical sycophants who control the ideological security network and have the boss's ear? Drop your audit in the comments below. I want to see your clinical assessment of this corporate structure. We move forward to the Weaponized Human Resources and Compliance Department, the Gestapo. If there is one entity that the global entertainment industry has completely romanticized and misunderstood, it is the Gestapo. Hollywood movies have brainwashed the public into believing that they were omnipresent super spies, standing in every alleyway, wearing dark leather coats, and single-handedly intimidating the population with overwhelming numbers and infinite resources. Let us look at the clinical, mathematical reality. Under the management of Reinhard Heydrich and Heinrich Müller, the Gestapo was an extraordinarily understaffed administrative department. They simply did not have the manpower to monitor an entire nation of millions. In several major German cities, a localized office might consist of a mere 30 active officers tasked with monitoring 500,000 citizens. Mathematically and logistically, a surveillance state cannot function on those minimal numbers through direct enforcement alone. So, what was the source of their profound, paralyzing influence? The shocking truth is that the Gestapo's true power did not come from their own machinery, their own technology, or their own agents. It came from the opportunistic and cowardly nature of the employees, the citizens themselves. Historical records and declassified archives prove that up to 80% of all Gestapo investigations did not initiate from brilliant detective work, wiretaps, or vast surveillance networks. They came from voluntary snitches. It was crowdsourced paranoia. Ordinary citizens voluntarily wrote letters denouncing their neighbors, their coworkers, and even their own family members. Why would they do this? Rarely was it out of genuine political loyalty. People used the system to settle petty personal grievances, to eliminate a rival for a corporate promotion, to end a bad marriage, or to steal an arrested neighbor's property and apartment. A citizen could simply claim that a colleague was not saluting enthusiastically enough, or was listening to a foreign radio broadcast, and the compliance department would remove that colleague from the equation. The Gestapo did not need to be everywhere because the population was aggressively policing itself. It was a zero-cost surveillance network powered entirely by human malice. The dictator's regime successfully weaponized the darkest, most opportunistic elements of human psychology. They provided a legal, state-sanctioned avenue for people to ruin each other for personal gain. This raises a highly disturbing question for modern society. Does the fault lie entirely with the rigid cruelty of the totalitarian system? Or does it lie with the human nature of ordinary people who eagerly sold out their neighbors the exact moment moral and legal boundaries were removed? Next, we examine the conclusion of the inner circle. The Cannibalistic Board of Directors. This is where the Level 6 and Level 7 video game ranking completely falls apart. At the very top of the regime, there was no structured, logical chain of command. Instead, it was an intentional snake pit. The CEO intentionally applied the concept of social Darwinism directly to his bureaucratic administration. He firmly believed that constant struggle produced ultimate strength, so he deliberately handed the exact same operational jurisdictions to multiple different directors. He wanted his top executives to ruthlessly compete and actively sabotage each other. By keeping them focused on destroying their peers' influence, he ensured that no single director could ever accumulate enough unified, consolidated power to challenge his absolute authority. Look at the extreme executive overlap and the resulting chaos. Hermann Göring, the flamboyant director of operations and the Luftwaffe, fiercely protected his massive economic assets and absolutely despised Heinrich Himmler, the director of security. Göring would frequently refuse to allocate transport trains to Himmler's projects. Meanwhile, Joseph Goebbels, the brilliant but fanatical director of marketing and propaganda, looked down on the severe financial corruption of both Göring and Himmler. They rarely cooperated. They hoarded critical intelligence, undermined each other's public standing, and constantly plotted to dismantle their peers' departments. It was a board of directors actively rooting for each other's failure. But if we must identify the ultimate corporate survivor in this chaotic board of directors, we must look away from the men with the biggest armies and look at Martin Bormann, the executive assistant. Bormann is the perfect proof that traditional military ranking meant absolutely nothing in this system. He did not wear a chest full of shiny combat medals. He did not command a single panzer division. He possessed zero public charisma and almost never spoke on the radio. Yet, by the end of the conflict, he was arguably the second most influential man in the entire administration. Why? Because Bormann held the physical keys to the CEO's office. As the personal secretary to the dictator, Bormann controlled the daily schedule. He decided which generals were granted an audience to plead for reinforcements, and which were permanently denied access. He decided which intelligence reports were placed on the CEO's desk, and which were quietly thrown into the fire to manipulate the leader's perception of reality. We have a saying in Germany: he who controls the paperwork and the schedule controls the entire corporation. In this regime, ultimate power did not reside in your military rank, your uniform, or your assigned level. Ultimate power resided purely in your physical proximity to the dictator's chair. Finally, we confront the ultimate conclusion of this highly volatile structure. To summarize, this regime didn't just collapse from external pressure, it bankrupted itself through internal corporate sabotage, duplicated efforts, and bureaucratic cannibalism. Ranking these historical figures from level 1 to 7 is an exercise for lazy historians who refuse to understand how administrative power actually flows. But if you think this fascist corporate chaos was an intimidating structure, wait until you see the cold, mechanical efficiency of the Soviet administrative machine. Which system controls the human mind better? The aggressive, overlapping chaos of the Axis, or the rigid, total compliance of the Soviet apparatus? Drop your historical audit below, and I'll see you in the next file.